I swear, honey, if someone had told me that my own son, the boy I raised with bedtime prayers, scraped knees, and peanut butter sandwiches, would look me dead in the eye on his wedding day and tell me to leave, I would have said they were out of their darn minds. But that morning, as I stood in that fancy church lobby clutching the little gift I'd brought for him, I felt something strange in the air, like the whole universe was holding its breath, waiting for something ugly to happen. And trust me, I felt it right in my bones. Those old mother instincts don't lie. I arrived early on purpose because I wanted a quiet moment alone with him before the chaos started. Wanted to pat his cheek, straighten his tie, whisper, "I'm proud of you, baby," like I used to on his first days of school. But as soon as I walked in, the bride's side stared at me like I'd wandered into the wrong town, like I didn't belong there, like I was just some old woman drifting around with no purpose. And even though I kept a polite smile plastered on, something inside me tightened. His bride, Madison, yeah, that one, was already stomping around in her big poofy dress, waving her arms as if she were conducting the whole event. And the minute her eyes landed on me, her expression dropped like she'd just seen a ghost she wasn't expecting. Now, let me be clear, I never had a problem with that girl. I bought her gifts, I treated her to lunch, I even forced myself to laugh when she told those corny jokes that weren't funny to anybody over 30. But from day one, she gave me the vibe that I was some kind of inconvenience, like my presence in my son's life was a piece of old furniture she wanted to toss out. And I told myself it was just nerves, just wedding stress. But oh Lord, when she stormed toward me that morning, I felt every red flag I had ever ignored shoot straight up. She didn't say hello, didn't hug me, didn't even pretend to be polite. She just hissed, "What are you doing here this early?" in that tight little voice that could cut glass, and I swear the floor shifted under me. I told her gently that I just wanted to congratulate my son before things got busy. Nothing dramatic, nothing wrong, just a mother wanting to soak in a moment she dreamed about since the day he was born. But she stepped closer, too close, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see him before the ceremony," like she was scolding a child. I brushed it off, thinking she was stressed, but when I stepped past her and called out for my son, watching him turn toward me looking handsome as ever in his suit, that old mother pride swelled in me so hard my eyes watered. And that's when everything snapped. Madison hooked her arm around his, yanked him close, and said loudly, "We talked about this. She needs to leave." And everyone in the lobby stared at me like I'd committed some kind of sin. My son's face, God help me, changed. It was like he was choosing who he wanted to be in that exact second. And instead of stepping toward his mother, instead of giving me even a crumb of kindness, he tightened his jaw and said, "Mom, I think you should go. You're making things stressful." Stressful. Me. The woman who worked double shifts so he could wear brand new sneakers on picture day. The woman who sold my wedding ring to pay his first college semester. The woman who stayed beside him through every heartbreak, every fever, every damn moment. My heart cracked so loud I swear I could hear it echo in the church rafters. But I swallowed the pain like I'd been swallowing it for months, ever since Madison tightened her grip around him. People stared, someone whispered, a bridesmaid snickered. I felt my cheeks heat, felt humiliation wash over me like cold water,
but I straightened my shoulders because that's what mothers do, and I forced myself to say, "If that's what you want, son." And he didn't even look guilty, not for a second. Madison smirked like she'd finally won some secret war I didn't even know we were fighting. So I walked toward the door, slow and steady, my legs shaking but my back straight, and just before I reached it, I heard Madison say to her mother, loud enough for me to hear, "See, told you I could handle her." Handle me, like I was some stray dog wandering into their precious celebration. I paused at the doorway, gripping the frame because suddenly something inside me that had been quiet for too long rose up. Anger, truth, strength, I don't know what it was, but it burned. And I turned around, walked right back into that lobby full of gawking faces, and what I said next, well, it sure as hell wiped every smug smile off their faces and froze that whole wedding party in place. But before I tell you exactly what I said, you need to know why that moment mattered so much, why it broke something in me and rebuilt something else entirely, why it wasn't just a mother being disrespected, but a whole lifetime of sacrifices coming to a boiling point. Because, honey, this story didn't start at the wedding. It started years before, and the truth behind it, oh, it's messier than anybody there was ready to hear.
Before you think I just walked into that church looking disturbed trouble, sweetheart, let me take you back a few years. Because none of what happened that morning, none of the humiliation, none of the cold stares, none of my son's gut punch betrayal came out of nowhere. It was the end of a long, painful road I'd been walking barefoot for years. A road full of moments I kept brushing aside because that's what mothers do. We forgive, we excuse, we swallow it down and hope our kids snap out of whatever spell life has cast on them. But looking back now, I realized the first signs started showing the day he brought Madison home for dinner. And I swear to you, the girl walked in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile people use when they're sizing up a room and figuring out where they rank. She glanced at my old but clean curtains, my mismatched plates, the dent in the fridge from when my son accidentally slammed it too hard as a teenager, and I saw that flicker of judgment flash across her face faster than a heartbeat, and that was the moment I felt something deep inside me whisper, "Careful." Still, I welcomed her like she was already family, because my boy loved her. And I made her my homemade roast chicken, the same recipe my mama taught me, the one that always made the kids lean back in their chairs and sigh with happiness. But that girl took 2 bites and spent the rest of the dinner glued to her phone, giggling at messages she never explained, while my son tried to pretend it didn't bother him. Over time, the distance between me and my boy slowly grew, not because of fights or disagreements, but because Madison always had a way of wedging herself into the cracks, turning small things into big deals. Like the Christmas I bought him a new leather wallet because his old one was falling apart, and she said right in front of him, "We already picked out a better one, but thanks anyway," twisting her lips into that fake smile, and my son just laughed nervously instead of defending me. Or the birthday surprise dinner I planned for him, spent the whole day cooking his favorites, only to have them canceled 30 minutes before arriving because she wasn't feeling the vibe, as she put it. Every time something like that happened, he'd come by a week later, guilt tucked between his words, hugging me a little too long as if apologizing without actually saying the words. And I'd always forgive him because he was my baby boy, my only child, the miracle I was told I'd never have. And when you love someone that deeply, you learn to live with little heartbreaks.
But things really started crumbling when they got engaged. Suddenly, every wedding decision felt like a silent message that I wasn't welcome. When I offered to help with planning, Madison smiled so sweetly it could give you a toothache and said, "Oh, we already have everything handled," which was her polite way of saying, "I don't want you involved." When I asked if they wanted to use my mother's veil, the one passed down 3 generations, she wrinkled her nose like I offered her a rag from my garage. My son saw it. He saw all of it, but he was caught in that fog men fall into when they're trying too hard to keep the peace, especially when they pick someone who needs to win every argument like it's a sport. Then came the rehearsal dinner. God, that night still burns. Madison's mother, who introduced herself like she was the Queen of Ohio, made a speech and actually said right into the microphone, "We're so grateful our daughter is marrying into a family that will elevate her life." Elevate, as if my son was some social ladder rung and I was the dirt below it. My fork nearly snapped in my hand, but I kept quiet because it was his moment, and I'd die before ruining one of my child's memories. After dinner, I tried to hug Madison good night just to show goodwill, and she stiffened like I'd tried to steal her wallet. My son saw that too. He pretended he didn't. And so when the wedding morning came and he asked me, his mother, to step outside and stop causing stress, it wasn't a sudden switch. It was the final blow, the crack that had been forming for years finally splitting wide open. And let me tell you something, sweetheart. I would have left quietly. I would have swallowed that heartbreak like every other one. I would have walked out and cried in my car like a ghost nobody saw. But then I heard her say she could handle me, and that lit something inside my chest I didn't even know was still alive. A fire, a strength, a truth that had been waiting years to speak. Because the woman she thought she was handling, oh, she had stories. She had receipts. She had sacrifices that girl knew nothing about. And in the next moment, standing in that church lobby with every eye on me, that fire rose so high I knew something was about to happen, something nobody in that building was ready for.
When I tell you that church lobby went dead quiet the second I stepped back from that doorway, honey, I mean you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Even a little flower girl froze mid-bubblegum chew as I turned around, straightened my shoulders, and walked right back toward the son who just tossed his own mother aside like some unwanted guest. And I wasn't walking angry, no ma'am. I was walking like a woman who finally snapped out of a fog she'd been living in for far too long. A woman who remembered all the years of sacrifices, all the times I held my tongue, all the little humiliations I swallowed to keep the peace. But something about hearing Madison say she could handle me flipped a switch in my soul, because I am many things, but I ain't something for a child to handle. I stood right there in front of my son, his bride, her mother, the bridesmaids hiding smirks behind their fake tans, and all those strangers staring at me like I'd stumbled into the wrong story. And I said, calm as a still lake, "Before I leave, I need to say something." And just like that, the room tightened. Madison crossed her arms like she was ready for a fight she thought she'd win. Her mother raised an eyebrow as if I didn't belong among their fancy-cated world. And my son, oh, my sweet boy, he looked at me with this mix of panic and embarrassment, like he was about to scold me for acting out in public. And Lord, that expression nearly broke me all over again. But instead of shrinking, I lifted my chin and said, "You know, I wasn't planning to make a speech today. I was just hoping to hug my son and watch him marry the woman he loves. But it seems like somewhere along the way, folks forgot who I am and what I've done to help him get here." A murmur rippled through the crowd.
Madison's smirk faltered just a little. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, I wasn't dramatic. That's what scared them. I said, "Son, when you were 8 years old and had that asthma attack in the middle of the night, who carried you running down 3 flights of stairs with no shoes on because the ambulance was taking too long?" His jaw tightened. He remembered. I saw it. When your dad left and we had nothing but overdue bills and a nearly empty fridge, who took double shifts at the diner and still made it home in time to read you a bedtime story because you were afraid to fall asleep alone? His eyes flickered. When you wanted to go to college but said you'd stay home because you didn't want me working myself to death, who sold her wedding ring so you wouldn't give up that dream? Someone in the back gasped, and Madison shot him a glare like, how dare he sympathize with me? My voice stayed steady, strong in a way I hadn't felt in years. All I ever wanted was for you to have a good life, a better life. And when you brought Madison home, I welcomed her with everything I had because you loved her. Not because she respected me, not because she tried, but because you loved her. That girl's cheeks turned pink, not the cute kind, the guilty kind. I continued. I stayed quiet when she rolled her eyes at my food, when she shut down every gift I gave you, when she redirected every holiday plan so it fit hers, when she acted like I was some outdated appliance you wanted to throw out. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to be the mother who interfered. My voice cracked then, not from weakness, but from truth finally rising. But today, you didn't just let her disrespect me, you joined her. My son's shoulder slumped like I'd punched the air out of him. He opened his mouth, probably to say sorry, probably to explain, but Madison squeezed his arm hard and he closed it again. That tiny action told me everything. So I said, if you had asked me politely to step outside, I would have gone. But throwing me out, embarrassing me, letting her talk about me like I'm some stray she needs to handle? No, no more of that. Madison rolled her eyes, muttering, "This is exactly why." I didn't let her finish. "Be quiet," I said, not loud, but sharp enough that it sliced the air clean in two. The whole room jolted. Even her own mother raised her eyebrows. I turned back to my son. I love you more than anything on this earth, and that's exactly why I'm leaving right now. Not because she told me to, not because you pushed me away. I'm leaving because I deserve better than being treated like a problem. His eyes filled with tears then, real ones, the kind to tell you the truth finally hit home. But before he could step toward me, I held up my hand. No, you made your choice today. I'm making mine. And just as I turned to walk out, heart pounding, tears threatening, my back straight as a steel beam, Madison suddenly shouted, "Fine, leave. See if we even invite you to the baby shower." Baby shower. The words slammed into the room like a thunderclap, freezing every soul in place, including me, including my son, who whipped his head toward her like she just confessed to a crime. And that's when I realized, Lord have mercy, that girl had just revealed something she wasn't supposed to say out loud yet, and it was about to blow that wedding wide open.
When Madison spit out those 2 little words, baby shower, the entire church lobby turned into a frozen photograph, like somebody hit pause on real life. And for a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. But the way every face snapped toward her proved I hadn't.
and the way my son's jaw dropped told me he hadn't known either. Not a single whisper, not a hint, not even a late-night "we need to talk" conversation, which meant the girl wasn't just cruel, she was hiding something big, something explosive, something that clearly wasn't meant to be announced in front of two families and a flock of confused strangers. My son's voice cracked through the silence first, rough and terrified. "What baby shower, Madison?" And she blinked at him like a deer who'd run smack into a glass door, trying to backpedal, her lips wobbling like she wished she could shove the words back into her mouth. But honey, it was too late, because once truth slips out, it doesn't crawl back in. She stammered something about timing and planning to tell him later, but he stepped away from her like her touch burned, running a shaky hand through his hair, the way he used to when he was a kid caught doing something stupid. Except this time, the stupidity wasn't his, it was hers, and the whole room felt like it was vibrating with tension so thick you could butter bread with it. I stood there watching the realization flood his face, the shock, the hurt, the betrayal, and my heart cracked for him, even though minutes earlier he'd thrown me out like I didn't matter, because that's how motherhood works. Even when they hurt you, you still want to shield them from life's sharpest blows. Madison's mother jumped in next, stepping forward with her manicured arrogance, saying, "Well, the cat's out now, so we may as well acknowledge it. Yes, they're expecting." But she said it with this smug grin that made my skin crawl, like she'd been sitting on a golden secret waiting for the perfect moment to use it. And now that her daughter slipped, she was trying to spin it into some hallmark moment. But my son's face wasn't soft or happy or excited. It was pale, white as a ghost, and full of something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. He asked, voice cracking like old wood, "How long have you known?" And Madison's eyes darted left, right, anywhere but at him, mumbling, "A few weeks, maybe a little more." But before he could respond, her mother blurted, "2 months at least," and you could practically see my son's heart fall right out of his chest and hit the floor. He stared at Madison like he didn't recognize her, like the woman standing in that white dress wasn't the one he'd planned a future with, and he whispered, "You've been pregnant for 2 months and you didn't tell me?" But the silence after that question screamed louder than any answer, and that's when another truth hit me. Hard, because 2 months earlier, my son had shown up at my house with dark circles under his eyes, sitting at my kitchen table stirring cold coffee, confessing that he and Madison had been arguing nonstop, that she'd been distant, moody, acting like every little thing he did was some giant flaw she needed to fix. And at that time, I'd told him lovingly, "All couples go through rough patches, sweetheart," thinking it was just stress, just wedding planning, just the usual bumps. But standing there in that church lobby, I realized it wasn't just mood swings. It wasn't just stress. She'd known. Her mother had known. Her entire family had known. And somehow the one person who wasn't allowed to know was the man marrying her. My son's voice suddenly boomed, loud, shaking, full of heartbreak. "Were you ever going to tell me, or were you just going to walk down that aisle and pretend everything was normal?" And Madison, instead of apologizing, instead of showing remorse, crossed her arms and snapped, "I didn't want you freaking out before the wedding. You always overreact," which was the worst thing she could have said, because the room erupted in gasps and whispers, and my son took a step back from her like she'd punched him. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since the whole mess started, and the pain in his eyes nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. It wasn't a save me look, it was a "Mom, I messed up" look. And I swear if the ground had opened up right there, the shock alone could have swallowed the whole building. Madison's father tried to smooth things over by saying something about family timing and protecting the couple's peace, but my son cut him off with a shaky don't, just don't, and that man shut his mouth so fast he nearly swallowed his tongue. Then, almost as if the universe wasn't finished twisting the knife, the pastor walked into the lobby, smiling and holding his little ceremony book, completely unaware of the emotional wildfire burning in the room, and asked, "Are we ready to begin?" And that question, oh honey, that question sent my son spiraling because he looked from me to Madison to her smug mother to the stunned guests, and you could see the war tearing through his heart. Duty, love, fear, humiliation, confusion. But before he could decide anything, before he could speak or step back or step forward, Madison said something else. Quiet, but not quiet enough, and it was the final crack that made everything collapse. She muttered, "Let's just get this over with," like the wedding was a chore, a task, something she had to tolerate instead of something she wanted. And my son's face went cold, ice cold, and I knew right then that nothing about this wedding was going to play out the way anyone expected.
The moment Madison muttered, "Let's just get this over with," something inside my son snapped so loudly, I swear the whole room felt it, like the air shifted, like the walls leaned closer just to hear what he'd say next. And I watched his face go from confused to hurt to something colder than a January morning, a look I hadn't seen since he was a teenager and learned the hard truth that his father wasn't coming home. He sucked in a shaky breath and said, "Is that all this is to you? Something to just get over with?" And Madison, too stubborn or too oblivious to read the room, rolled her eyes and fired back, "Well, it's not exactly going smoothly anymore, thanks to your mother," pointing at me like I was a pothole she'd tripped over. That was it. That was the spark that set the match. My son turned toward her fully now, the lobby spinning around him, and said, "Don't blame my mom for the choices you made. You hid something huge from me. You lied." Madison puffed up like a blowfish, snapping, "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you yet." And her mother jumped in, wagging a finger and saying she was protecting the relationship. But my son shot back, "Protecting it from me?" And the whole room gasped like they were watching a live soap opera unfold. The pastor, poor thing, still standing there holding his ceremony book like a shield, cleared his throat and gently asked, "Should we maybe step aside and talk privately?" But Madison barked, "No, we're doing this wedding." And I swear even the floral arrangements trembled at her voice. My son shook his head slowly, hands on his hips, pain written on every inch of him, and said, "You kept a pregnancy from me, Madison. Do you understand how big that is? How much trust that breaks?" But instead of softening, instead of showing even a flicker of remorse, she folded her arms and snapped, "You're overreacting like always. You're just emotional right now because your mom made a scene." That's when every single head in that lobby swung toward me again, as if waiting to see if I'd break down or explode or shrink into myself. But I didn't move an inch. I just watched my son finally see the truth standing right in front of him. The bridesmaids, who had been whispering behind their bouquets like bar gals swapping gossip, suddenly shifted uncomfortably because even they realized Madison had crossed the line a mile wide. And then out of nowhere, one of the groomsmen, big guy, beard, kind eyes, stepped forward and said, "Man, she's got to at least apologize. You don't treat someone's mom like that." And you would have thought he slapped Madison across the face with a bouquet because she whipped around and snarled, "Stay out of it, Tyler."
But it was too late. The room was turning against her. Even members of her own side looked uneasy, like they wished they'd left their gift on the table but skipped the wedding. My son scrubbed his hands over his face, trying to breathe through the chaos, and he looked at Madison like he was searching for the girl he fell in love with, the one who used to hold his hand at the lake, the one he once told me had the sweetest laugh in the world. But the woman in front of him wasn't her, not today. He finally said, voice low but deadly clear, "We can't get married like this, not today." And the explosion that erupted from Madison could have blown the roof clean off the building. "What do you mean we can't get married today? After everything we planned? After everything my family paid for? Are you insane?" She stumped toward him, jabbing a finger into his chest like she was trying to poke the truth back into him. But he stepped away, shaking his head. "I'm not walking into a marriage full of secrets and control," he said, and a mother gasped like someone had yanked her pearls. "Control?" she screeched. "If anyone's controlling, it's her." She pointed at me again. "She's been manipulating you since birth." And honey, that was the last straw. My son spun around so fast that even I flinched, and he shouted, "Don't you ever talk about my mom like that again." The whole church froze. Even the lights seemed to flicker in shock. For the first time in years, he stood up for me, loudly, clearly, and fiercely, and hearing it felt like someone wrapped my heart in warm hands. Madison looked like she'd been slapped by the universe itself, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on a dock. And when she saw the room wasn't backing her, when she realized she'd lost control of the whole moment, her face twisted, ugly and red, and she spat, "Fine, if you walk away now, don't expect me to stick around when you come crawling back." My son didn't even blink. "I'm not crawling anywhere," he said. "I just need honesty and respect, and if we don't have that, then this wedding stops today." You could have heard a fly sneeze. People were whispering prayers or maybe gossip, who knows? And in the middle of that silence, Madison screamed, full on screamed, "You are throwing away your family for her?" and pointed at me like I was some wicked witch come to destroy her castle. But my son finally said the words I'd been aching to hear for years. "She is my family." And before anyone could react, before Madison could launch into another attack, before the pastor could give spiritual CPR to the moment, something happened behind us, something nobody expected, something that made every head whip around and every breath hitch in their throat. Just as Madison stood there shaking with rage, mascara smudging, chest heaving like a bull ready to charge, a sudden thud echoed through the lobby, sharp, heavy, unmistakable. And every head snapped toward the sound, expecting maybe a vase falling or a flower girl dropping a basket. But no, it was none of that. It was my ex-husband, my son's father, walking through the doors like a storm 10 years late, older, thinner, guilt carved into the wrinkles around his eyes. And when my son saw him standing there wearing the same expression he'd worn the day he left us, everything inside that boy shattered all over again. Because life has a cruel way of stacking heartbreaks on top of each other at the worst possible moment. My ex looked at the three of us, me, our son, Madison, then at the chaos swirling around the wedding party, and he said in a rough, tired voice, "I came because I didn't want my mistakes to follow you into yours." And the room fell silent again. But this silence was different, heavier, almost sacred, like everyone knew they were witnessing a generational wound opening right in front of them. My son whispered, "Dad?" like he wasn't sure if the man was real, and Madison, who had no clue who he was, spat, "And who the hell are you?" because of course she did. My ex ignored her completely, blessedly, and walked up to our son, stopping just a few feet away as if afraid to get too close. "Son," he said, voice cracking, "don't marry someone who controls you. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't choose someone who turns you against the people who'd bleed for you." And honey, the way that hit the room, it was like a sermon delivered straight from the universe. My son's eyes glossed over with tears, his shoulders shaking as decades of unanswered questions, unresolved pain, and buried anger all rose to the surface. He whispered, "Why are you here now?" And my ex swallowed hard and said, "Because when I heard what was happening, when I heard you threw your mom out, I realized I failed twice. Once by leaving her, and again by not teaching you how to protect her instead of repeating my cowardice." Madison threw up her hands, yelling, "Oh my God, is everyone here just to gang up on me?" But no one paid attention to her anymore. The room was locked on the three of us, our broken little family, trying to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. And then my son, my sweet boy, he turned to me with tears streaming down his cheeks and whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry," voice trembling like a child's. And before I could open my arms, he collapsed against me, burying his face into my shoulder the way he used to when he was small and scared. And I held him like I'd been waiting years for that moment, my own tears soaking into his hair. He sobbed, "I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I thought keeping peace meant staying silent. I'm so sorry I hurt you." And I stroked his back, whispering, "It's okay, baby. You learned. That's what matters." Madison scoffed so loudly the chandelier shook, shouting, "This is ridiculous. You're all insane." But no one, even her own parents, didn't move to support her anymore. They stood stiff, embarrassed, realizing their daughter wasn't the angel they kept pretending she was. My son finally stepped away from me, wiped his eyes, turned toward Madison, and said with a voice steady as a judge delivering a verdict, "I can't marry you. Not today. Maybe not ever." And that girl, oh honey, she unraveled. She screamed, "You can't do this. My whole family's here. Everything is paid for. I am pregnant with your baby." And the way she emphasized "your" made her voice crack. And my son stared at her long and hard before asking the question everyone in that lobby had been thinking, but no one dared to say. "Are you sure it's mine?" The slap of silence that followed was so brutal, even the pastor winced. Madison's face drained of color, ghost white, lips trembling, because for the first time she realized she wasn't the only one holding power. She stuttered, "How dare you even," but her mother whispered, "Madison," in this warning tone that made every hair on my arm stand up. My son took a step back, breathing hard, and said, "We'll talk later, privately, but this wedding, it's over." Madison let out a howl, yes, an actual howl, threw her bouquet at his feet, and stormed out the door with her heels clacking like gunshots, her parents scrambling after her. And then the room sighed, like the tension had been holding us all underwater and someone finally let us breathe. Guests started dispersing, whispering about refunds and drama and bless their hearts, while my ex-husband quietly said, "I should go," and I nodded, not angry, not bitter, just at peace, because he had done the one right thing he needed to do. My son and I walked outside together, the cold air hitting our faces, fresh and sharp. He whispered, "Mom, thank you for not leaving." And I smiled, squeezed his hand, and said, "Sweetheart, I never will, even when you push me away. That's just what moms do." And as we stood in that parking lot, watching the wedding that never was crumble behind us, my son said something that settled right into my soul like warm light. "From now on, I choose family, starting with you." And honey, that was worth every tear, every heartbreak, every ugly moment inside that church. Because that day wasn't the day I lost my son. It was the day I finally got him back.
I wish I could tell you that After I dropped that truth bomb in front of the whole wedding crowd, everything magically calmed down, people apologized, angels sang, and my son came running back like a little boy who finally realized he'd messed up. But life doesn't work like those soft Hallmark movies, sweetheart. Sometimes the truth hits harder than a brick through a window, and that's exactly what happened next, because as soon as the room went dead silent and everyone felt the weight of what I'd just said, Madison, the bride who had just tried to toss me out like yesterday's trash, went stiff as a board, her face turning pale like she saw a ghost, and suddenly she wasn't the confident little queen bee anymore. She was shaking, stammering, mumbling something under her breath while clutching her bouquet like she hoped it might save her, and all I could do was stand there, heart pounding, my mother's instincts screaming at me to sit, breathe, and calm down before I passed out, but the adrenaline kept me upright, even though my knees felt like jello. Then, out of nowhere, Madison's own father stepped forward, this tall, heavy-set man with the kind of voice that can cut through a storm, and he said, "Madison, is that true?" in a tone so sharp the room flinched, and she whirled around with tears in her eyes and shook her head so fast her veil trembled, but the guilt was practically leaking out of her pores. People were whispering, eyes bouncing between us like a tennis match, and I could hear somebody mutter, "I knew that girl was trouble," which honestly made me want to laugh and cry at the same time, because for months I'd been the only one trying to see the good in her. My son, meanwhile, was stuck in the middle like a lost little boy, jaw clenched, hands shaking, looking at his bride like he didn't know if he should defend her or run for the hills. Then things got even crazier. Madison suddenly dropped to the floor, not fainting, but kneeling, sobbing, mascara streaking down her cheeks, and she started begging, literally begging, saying, "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted her to respect me. I just wanted one day that wasn't about her." And let me tell you, honey, if my heart hadn't already been cracked open like an old porch board, that might have done it. Because as much as she hurt me, seeing a young woman crumble like that, well, it does something to you. I'm a mother before anything else, and I don't like seeing kids, yes, even the grown ones, fall apart. But before I could open my mouth, her mother, sweet little woman with big, watery eyes, rushed over and wrapped her arms around her daughter, whispering frantically, while her father just stared at the ground like he was trying to swallow a disappointment big enough to choke on. And there was my son, torn apart, rubbing the back of his neck the same way he did when he was nervous as a child, muttering, "Why would you do all this? Why would you lie to me? Why would you treat my mom that way on our wedding day?" But Madison didn't answer, not really. She just kept crying into her mother's shoulder while the guests stood frozen, unsure if they should leave or stay, or pretend this was the most dramatic wedding moment they'd ever witnessed. Someone from the DJ booth actually killed the music, which made the silence even heavier. And then the pastor cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should all take a moment to step outside," which was his polite pastor way of saying this wedding was going straight off a cliff. Now here's where the real turning point happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet. Quiet enough that only a few caught it. My son walked toward me, slow, hesitant, eyes red, chest rising and falling like he couldn't get enough air, and he stopped just inches away from me, this grown man I raised, this boy I held through nightmares and heartbreaks, and he whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry."
And even though the words were barely audible, they cut deeper than anything anyone had said all day. I wanted to pull him into my arms the way I used to when he scraped his knee or broke his toy, but I didn't, because something in his face told me he wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for an anchor, something solid, something true, something that wouldn't fall apart on him. And then he said the sentence that changed everything. I don't know if I can marry her. Oh, sweetheart, my breath caught so sharp I swear it scratched my lungs, because that wasn't some impulsive, angry outburst. That wasn't embarrassment talking. That was heartbreak, real heartbreak, the kind that hits a man when he realizes the person he loved isn't who he thought she was. And the room went still again, like someone hit pause on reality. Madison's crying stopped mid-sob, her parents froze, the guests stared, and my heart broke for all of them, but especially for my son, because I could see it right there in his eyes that everything he thought he knew was unraveling in real time.
I swear, sweetheart, I didn't think anything else could shock me after the chaos that had already unfolded. But life loves proving me wrong, because right when my son stood there at the altar saying he didn't know if he could marry Madison, right when his voice cracked and his whole world seemed to wobble like a loose porch step, that's when another truth pushed its way to the surface, something I had buried so deep in my heart I thought it died years ago. And yet suddenly, without warning, it clawed its way out and nearly knocked the air clean out of my chest. Because as much as Madison had hurt me, as cruel as she had been, as humiliating as her lies were, I realized she wasn't the only one guilty of keeping secrets, not by a long shot. And the worst part was, knowing the secret I carried could blow the entire wedding sky high if I dared to say it out loud. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them together, and my heart felt like it had switched from beating to punching, because in that split second when my son looked to me for guidance, for truth, for something steady to hold on to, I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. He deserved honesty, even if it tore everything apart. But before I could try to figure out how to even begin untangling the mess inside me, Madison suddenly stood up, face blotchy, eyelashes clumped with mascara, bouquet crushed in her fist, and she pointed right at me with a trembling finger, yelling, "You think she's innocent? She's hiding something. She's been hiding something for years." And the whole room gasped like she had just slapped Jesus across the face, because the last thing anyone expected was for the bride to turn the fire back on me at a moment like that. My son whipped around so fast I heard his neck crack, staring at her like she'd lost her mind. But Madison wasn't backing down. Her tears dried up like someone flipped a switch, and suddenly she was furious, shaking, breathing hard, the kind of angry that comes from fear, not malice. "Tell them," she shrieked. "Tell them the truth. Tell your son what you told me." And honey, my soul dropped straight into my shoes, because she wasn't lying, not entirely. She had twisted it, sure, but she was pulling on a thread that should have never been touched. And as everyone's eyes turned to me, my son, the guests, her parents, the pastor, even the children who'd stopped fidgeting, I felt heat rise through my face like I was standing under a spotlight I never asked for. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, and my knees suddenly felt like they didn't know how to leg anymore. My son stepped closer, his voice raw, scared. "Mom, what is she talking about?" And the sound of his voice, that mixture of confusion and desperation, it sliced me open. Madison took a step forward, too, practically spitting the words. "She told me she didn't think you should marry me because she was afraid you'd end up just like—"
But she didn't finish because I cut her off louder than I meant to, louder than I'd ever spoken in public. Enough! The word bounced around the venue like thunder and even startled me, but it stopped her cold. The room was dead silent again, except for the faint rumble of someone's nervous stomach, and for a moment I couldn't even breathe, because I knew right then that the truth was about to come out whether I wanted it to or not. My secret, the one I hid to protect him, the one I prayed he'd never need to know, the one that shaped his whole childhood without him ever realizing it. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat and felt the weight of 20-something years press against my chest, and when I opened them, my son was staring at me with those same brown eyes he had as a toddler, the ones that always asked questions before his mouth did. And so I told the truth, not all of it, not yet, but enough to freeze him in place. I told her, I said quietly, that I was afraid you'd end up in a marriage full of control and manipulation, because that's the kind of marriage I survived. You could have heard a pin drop. My son blinked hard. Madison's mouth fell open. A few older women in the back exchanged knowing looks, like the truth had just touched a nerve they recognized. But I wasn't done, not even close. My voice cracked as I continued. I didn't tell you everything about your father. Gasps spread through the room like wildfire, because everyone, and I mean everyone, knew the version of my late husband that I'd let the world believe. Hard-working, dependable, quiet, a good man taken too soon. But the truth was darker, sharper, painful, and telling my son that his father, the man he idolized, was not the hero he thought, it felt like betrayal. Madison, for once, was silent. My son swallowed hard. "Mom, what did he do?" he whispered. And that question, God help me, that question shattered something inside me so deep I thought I'd drown right there in front of everyone. My chest tightened and tears burned hot behind my eyes, because I knew the next words out of my mouth would change my son's entire identity, his childhood memories, the way he saw himself. But secrets don't stay buried forever, not in families, not in marriages, and definitely not at weddings where truth has a habit of ripping through lace and lies like a storm. So I took a breath that tasted like fear and finally spoke the one sentence I never thought I'd say out loud. Your father wasn't who you think he was.
I never wanted the truth to come out like this, public, raw, sharp enough to slice open old scars. But once the words left my mouth, your father wasn't who you think he was, there was no stuffing them back inside, and the moment that sentence echoed through the wedding hall, you could practically feel the air shift, like everyone suddenly realized they weren't just witnessing drama, they were witnessing a family earthquake, the kind that cracks foundations and sends decades of silence crashing to the floor. My son went completely still, his jaw tightening the way it did when he was trying not to cry as a boy, and for a second I swear I saw little flashes of his childhood on his face. Him clutching his soccer ball, him sitting on the kitchen counter swinging his legs, him running to the door when his father came home. Except now all those memories were floating in the air, like fragile soap bubbles about to pop, and it made my heart twist until I could barely breathe. Madison's parents exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Some guests whispered like they were trying to solve a mystery they didn't have enough pieces for, and the pastor looked like he wished he could teleport himself straight out of the building. But my son, sweetheart, he took one shaky step toward me and said in a quiet, cracked voice, "Mom, what do you mean?" And I could feel the whole world waiting for my answer. My hands felt numb, my throat tight, but once truths start pouring, they don't stop just because you're scared. So I told him the ugly part, the part I hoped he'd never need to know. Your father had two sides, I said, swallowing the sting of the memories. There was the side you saw, the one who helped you with homework, who bought you your first bike, who tucked you in at night. But when you were asleep, when you weren't around, he wasn't gentle, he wasn't kind. And as soon as I said it, the weight of years landed smack on my chest, almost knocking me back. A couple of older women near the aisle put hands over their mouths. Some men shook their heads like they didn't want to believe it. But the ones who had lived a little, who knew the world wasn't always shiny, they went silent in a way that meant understanding, not judgment. My son's breathing got heavier, faster, like panic and confusion had wrapped both hands around his lungs. He stumbled back one step, then another, and whispered, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Oh, sweetheart, that question hurt more than any bruise I ever hid. "I wanted you to love him," I said softly. "I didn't want your childhood to be painted by the parts of him that hurt me." My voice broke, and I felt tears slide down my face, hot and humiliating, but I didn't wipe them away. I stayed quiet because I wanted your memories to stay clean, better than the truth. Madison's eyes widened like puzzle pieces finally clicked into place, like she realized the overprotectiveness she mistook as control came from trauma, not ego. Some guests nodded in sympathy, some looked away, not knowing where to rest their eyes in a moment this intimate and painful. But my son, he just whispered, "All this time?" And that's when I knew I'd shattered something precious, his belief in the man who raised him. Then came the part that turned the whole wedding upside down. Madison stepped forward, wiped the last streak of mascara from her cheek, and said, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you only hint at it? Why did you make me feel like I had to fit into some perfect mold just to be good enough?" And for once there was no venom in her voice, only confusion and a hurt so honest it softened her whole face. "Because," I said gently, "when someone grows up seeing one parent mistreat the other, they learn to brace themselves, to overthink, to fear the worst." I took a deep breath. "I didn't mean to judge you. I was scared. I saw signs, not of who you are, but of what I survived, and I didn't want my son repeating the cycle." My son pressed both hands to his head, pacing in small, frantic circles, like he was trying to outrun everything he'd just learned. "So, all this fighting, all this tension, it wasn't about her?" he said, pointing at Madison with a broken voice. "It was about survival," I whispered. "Nothing more, nothing less." And right then, something in him cracked open, not anger, but grief, a deep, heavy grief for the father he thought he knew, and the mother he suddenly realized had carried more pain than he ever imagined. He walked up to me slowly, searching my eyes. "Did he ever hurt me?" he asked, voice trembling, and I shook my head quickly, firmly. "Never. Not once. That's why I stayed, so he would never touch you with the hand he used on me." He covered his mouth, turned away, and quietly cried, grown man tears, the ones nobody is prepared for. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some wiping their own eyes, because even though it was messy, even though it was heartbreaking, it was real, and sometimes real is louder than any wedding vows. Then my son took a deep breath and said something none of us saw coming, something that flipped the wedding on its head for the second time that day. "I need to step away. I need time. I can't marry anyone right now, not until I understand who I am without the lies.
A gasp shot through the room. Madison froze. Her parents stood stunned, and I just held my breath, because even though he hadn't said the final words yet, I knew what was coming.
I swear, honey, if you told me that a wedding could hit 3 separate breaking points before noon, I would have laughed in your face and told you to stop watching those dramatic TV shows. But life clearly had other plans, 'cause right after my son said he needed time and couldn't marry anyone until he understood who he was without the lies, the room didn't just go silent, it went dead, like the air froze mid-breath, and everyone was afraid to even blink in case it shattered the moment. Madison stood there like a statue in a white dress, bouquet dangling from her fingers, her lips parted like she was stuck between screaming, crying, and collapsing, and her mother reached toward her but stopped halfway like she wasn't sure if touching her would make it worse. Meanwhile, her father looked like a man trying to swallow a whole hurricane, and the guests, poor souls, looked like they wanted to melt through the floorboards just to escape the emotional storm swirling around them. But my son, sweetheart, he didn't even notice the chaos. He was staring at the floor like the truth about his father had cracked something inside him, something deep, something he didn't know how to put back together. He rubbed his face with both hands, shaking his head as if trying to shake off years of confusion he didn't realize he'd been carrying. The pastor stepped forward, clearing his throat in that gentle, "I'm trying to help, but I have no idea how" kind of way. "Son," he said softly, "you can take all the time you need. Marriage shouldn't begin with uncertainty." Madison snapped her head toward the pastor like he'd slapped her with a Bible. "Are you kidding me?" she cried, voice shrill, trembling. "You're just gonna let him walk away after everything, after all the planning, after all the people who came here, after—" But she cut herself off when her father rested a firm hand on her shoulder, murmuring, "Let the boy speak." And oh boy, did he speak. My son lifted his head, tears still shining in his eyes, but his voice steadying in a way that made him seem older than he'd ever looked. "Madison," he said, turning to her fully, "I loved you, truly. I wanted a life with you, but today showed me we weren't ready. I wasn't ready, and you weren't honest." Madison's chin quivered. "I apologized," she whispered, small, desperate. "I told you I messed up. I told you I was overwhelmed." He nodded. "Yes, but you didn't just lie. You tried to control the one person who has been in my corner my entire life, and now I know why that hit me so hard." His eyes flicked to me for a second, soft and pained, because deep down I grew up seeing control without recognizing it, and I guess I was repeating patterns without even knowing. You could practically feel the guests mentally connecting dots like detectives at a crime board. But Madison wasn't done. She took a shaky breath, stepped closer, and said, "So what? You're just gonna break off the wedding just like that over something your mother told you, something from decades ago?" And that's when my son, bless his heart, gave her a look that wasn't angry, wasn't bitter, just exhausted. "No," he said gently, "I'm ending this because the foundation is broken, not because of my mom, because of us, because of today." Madison let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, and for a moment I honestly thought she might faint, but instead she spun around and hurled her bouquet across the room. Yes, ma'am, threw it like a fastball, sending petals flying everywhere. A few guests yelped and ducked. Some kids giggled because they thought it was part of the show, and Madison, breathing hard, spit out, "I can't believe this. I can't believe you're humiliating me like this."
My son flinched but didn't budge. "I'm sorry, I really am." Then, God help us all, Madison stormed toward me, fury blazing in her eyes like she was ready to blame me for every heartbreak she'd ever had. "This is your fault," she screamed. "If you had just stayed quiet, if you hadn't tried to make him doubt me." But before she could finish, my son stepped between us so fast it made Madison stumble backward. "No," he said firmly, "she didn't ruin anything. You did that all on your own." The room gasped. Madison looked stunned, like she'd just been slapped with the truth she never expected to hear. And then her knees buckled, and her mother rushed to catch her before she hit the floor. Just when everyone thought the drama had hit its peak, the venue door swung open with a loud bang, so loud half the guests jumped and the other half turned like they were watching the plot twist of a lifetime. And there stood a man none of us ever expected to see again, a man I hoped I'd never lay eyes on, a man whose presence alone made my stomach drop clean through the floor. And, sweetheart, when my son saw him, he whispered the word that froze the entire room. "Dad?" Yes, the father we thought was dead.
When my son's voice cracked, "Dad," and the man stepped fully into the lobby, time seemed to slow down like life had hit the pause button. Because, honey, that wasn't just any father, it was his father. The man who had disappeared from our lives for over a decade, whose absence shaped so much of our story, and who now stood there looking older, tired, and guilty as sin, but undeniably real. Guests gasped. Madison froze mid-step, bouquet still clutched like a weapon, and I felt my chest tighten like someone had put a vice around it. My ex-husband swallowed hard, eyes flicking to me first, then to our son, and for a moment there was this silence so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My son's knees shook, and I swear the air around us felt electric, charged with decades of pain, love, disappointment, and hope, all colliding at once. The man cleared his throat and said softly, "Son, I know I've been gone, and I have no right to even ask for forgiveness, but I couldn't let you marry someone under a shadow of lies and fear. I came back because I had to make sure you knew the truth before anything else." My son's face crumpled, a storm of emotions raging behind those brown eyes, and he whispered, "Dad, why now? Why didn't you ever—" But my ex held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "Because I wasn't ready to face what I did to your mother, what I did to you. And maybe I never will fully be, but I couldn't let this moment, this wedding, happen under lies. Because honesty, son, is worth more than any ceremony, more than any dress, more than any celebration." Madison, at this point, looked like she'd been pulled into a horror movie she didn't audition for. She stammered, "Wait, what truth? What are you talking about?" But my son's face, pale and tear-streaked, was the only answer she needed. His gaze shifted back to me, and I gave him a small nod, one that said, "It's okay, you're ready now." And that's when I spoke, calm and steady, though my heart was pounding like a drum in a parade. "Son, the man you called your father, the one who left us, he wasn't always the man you remember. He made mistakes, huge ones, but none of them were about you. He was lost, and he let that lostness hurt me. But today, you need to hear it from him, and you need to make your own choice." My son's jaw dropped slightly, and I swear he finally realized just how much had been hidden from him all these years. My ex-husband nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Son,
I wasn't there when I should have been. I hurt your mother. I left, but I never stopped loving you. And I've come back now because I don't want you repeating the cycle. I don't want you walking into a life built on secrets, just like I did. And with that, the weight of the truth finally hit my son, like a tidal wave that washed away years of confusion, anger, and betrayal. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in the release of decades-long tension. He whispered, I get it now. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned to Madison. I can't marry you. Not today, maybe not ever, he said. And though his voice trembled, there was clarity in it, a kind of inner peace that comes from finally standing in truth. Madison's face went pale, tears welling, realizing she had lost control entirely. But we're expecting, she tried to say, but he shook his head. That doesn't change what I need. I need honesty, I need respect, and I need my family. At that, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him, holding him close like I had so many times before, the kind of embrace that says, you're home, you're safe, you're loved. My ex-husband placed a hand on my shoulder, nodding, and though our past was jagged and broken, there was a shared understanding. We had both survived. My son finally breathed deeply and said, I choose family. I choose truth. I choose us. Guests began to murmur, whispers turning into applause, not for the wedding that never happened, but for the courage it took to stand in the middle of heartbreak and face reality. Madison's parents quietly gathered her, their faces pale, as she finally realized some battles aren't won with control, they're lost with honesty prevails. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Pure, messy, imperfect peace. My son had his family back. He had the truth, and we were standing together, stronger than we had been in a long, long time. As the crowd slowly dispersed, some lingering in awe, others in awkward embarrassment, my son leaned into me, whispering, "Thanks for never giving up on me." And I smiled through my tears, holding his hand and saying, "Sweetheart, I never could. Not then, not ever." And as we watched the sunset spill warm light across the empty church lobby, I knew one thing for certain. Weddings can break or build, secrets can shatter or save, but family, real family, survives everything. And honey, that's the day I lost the wedding but gained my son back forever.